Chapter 12. April. April hadn't thought she would miss Lucia so much, but she was certainly excited to meet her for coffee. She couldn't wait to tell her that she'd been wrong about Carter. They'd now had half a dozen dates, and he didn't seem to be looking to leave any time soon. In fact, April was fairly certain he'd be calling again soon to ask her to the next practice. She scanned the small shop and waved as she saw Lucia near the back. Married life certainly seemed to agree with her, as an invisible glow appeared to surround her. Lucia smiled and stood as April approached. "It's so good to see you. Thank you for setting this up." Though they were not generally huggers, April found she didn't mind when Lucia pulled her close this time. She hadn't expected to miss her roommate as much as she had over the last few weeks. "It's good to see you again, too. Have you already ordered?" Lucia nodded as she sat back at the table. "Actually, I ordered for both of us already." She glanced up as an employee headed their direction with drinks in hand. "In fact, I think this may be them." "Thank you," she said to the employee, as the woman placed the drinks on the table and nodded. "I hope you still like caramel macchiatos." April smiled as she lifted the drink and inhaled. "Of course I do. I haven't changed that much since you've been gone." She loved the smell of caramel, loved it in candles, loved it in candy, and loved it in coffee. It was the only coffee she could drink. She took a sip, enjoying the flavor as it flooded her taste buds. "What have you been doing since I've been gone?" Lucia asked, before taking a sip of her own drink. April bit the inside of her lip. As tempted as she was to share, she knew she should ask about Lucia's honeymoon first. Besides, once they started talking about Carter, they might not make it back to that. And she was curious. "I'll tell you what I've been up to, but first I want to hear about the honeymoon." A soft pink color flooded Lucia's cheeks as she glanced down to the tabletop. "It was amazing. Jefferson didn't want to leave Haley out, so we took his sister Lorelai on the cruise with us. They shared one room and we shared the other. It was so beautiful and relaxing. If you ever get the chance to go on one, you should." "I hope I will one day. That sounds amazing. Where did the cruise go?" "To the Bahamas. We stopped at a couple of islands out there, and we went parasailing and snorkeling. I didn't think I could do parasailing with my fear of heights, but I'm glad I did. You could see almost the whole island from up there. And snorkeling? Oh my goodness, it was prettier than I even imagined. One of the islands we stopped at had a giant water park too, which Haley drug us to even though there was a pool on the boat. Then we sailed back to Florida and stopped at a port in the southern tip before finally returning to Fort Lauderdale." From the sheer joy coloring Lucia's tone and the animation in her voice, it was obvious she had enjoyed herself immensely. "And how is it being back and living in Jefferson's house?" Lucia had moved most of her stuff out before the wedding, but there were a few of her items left in their place. "It's different, but not in a bad way. It took me a few nights to get used to sharing a bed with someone all night, though. I'm so used to having it to myself and the silence of my room. It's an adjustment to get used to someone else's breathing and movements." April could agree with that. Though few of the men she'd shared a bed with had stayed the whole night, she'd remembered that same feeling when they had. "Now I want to hear what you've been up to," Lucia said. The pointed look she gave April told her that Lucia at least had an idea, and April wondered if she was merely guessing or if Carter had said something to Jefferson. "Well, I haven't done anything nearly as exciting as you, but Carter and I have been on a few more dates." She said the words slowly and watched Lucia's face for her thoughts. "How many is a few?" Lucia must have been expecting that answer because her face didn't change. We got together after the wedding, and then the day after for a movie. He invited me to a practice, and we spent the day after the practice together. Lucia turned her cup in a slow circle on the table. That's more than he normally stays with a woman. Do you think it's serious? We haven't talked about it yet, but I think it could be. I mean, he's already taken me on more dates than any other woman, right? Though she still had insecurities, talking with Lucia was bolstering April's confidence. After all, Lucia had been involved in the football life longer. And while April didn't think Lucia knew Carter well, she certainly knew his reputation. Well, I hope for your sake it is, but I'd still be careful. People can certainly change, but his track record isn't stellar. Just watch your heart and don't move too quickly. April felt the heat rush to her face at Lucia's words. She knew Lucia was talking about intimacy. After all, they'd had this conversation more than once over the last few years. But how did she tell her friend that ship had already sailed? Across the table, Lucia sucked in her breath, and her eyes filled with sorrow. April, tell me you didn't. I didn't mean to. It just kind of happened after the wedding. Then I felt awful after, but then he called the next day. I know it was too early, but I really don't think it was a bad thing. Although if that was the case, why did she still feel that nagging feeling of guilt in her stomach? A soft sigh spilled from Lucia's lips. I know we don't agree on this issue, April, but I wish you could see yourself the way God does. You are looking for validation with men, but they can't give it to you. Only God can. She paused, and April felt her defenses rising. How did Lucia know what she was looking for? She wasn't in April's head. But even as she opened her mouth to protest, she remembered that was exactly what she'd felt after, that she was seeking validation. I won't say anything more, Lucia continued, her voice softening, except to say that I'll always be here for you, and I hope that you find what you're looking for. Somehow those words, said in kindness, made April feel even worse. Lucia wasn't judging her, but she was disappointed in April. That much was obvious. And somehow it deepened the disappointment April felt for herself. She needed to talk to Carter, needed to find out if his interest was more than a passing infatuation. If it was, she would be vindicated. And if it wasn't, well, she would pick up her pieces and try to change her life.